Now, Ken Holland, in his media address at the end of the season, said he wants to re-sign goalie Mike Smith. Now, Smith had a great year for the Oilers in the regular season, and he played very well in the playoffs. And he just turned 39. People always point out age and how much could he have left in the tank. Now, never mind, Smith hasn't played consistently great over his career. I mean, he did have a good run in Arizona with the Coyotes, the time a decade ago when they went to the conference final. But, based on his performance this year and, considering what goalies would be available in free agency, I guess there's always the trade possibilities. But, what do you make of Holland saying he wants to re-sign Mike Smith?
I think it's perfectly applicable. You can't kick him to the curb. Last year they circled back to Mike after trying for Markstrom, and he signed in Calgary for about the same money, different term, about the same money. And then I'm sure they looked at other goalies who were out there, Thomas Greiss and other people who were unrestricted free agents, and said, we don't want to pay $3 million or whatever, $3.5 million for those sort of players. So they circled back to Mike, and he had something to prove, and he proved it. He made $1.5 million last year and was the starting goalie. I think you probably go to Mike and say, we'll give you $2.5 million for the next season, which means then you have to find. I think it's a bigger concern for the Oilers finding somebody for Mike to play with than saying to Mike, okay, you're our guy. Now, in an 82-game season, I don't know if Mike can play more than 50 over 82 games with all the travel and stuff that's going to happen next year, which means you need a goalie who can play at least 30 to 35, depending on how many starts Mike gets. And so it might turn out to be more of a 1 and a 1A, like so many teams in the NHL have. Whether in good teams, whether you're, Carolina or whomever, the Islanders are a prime example. You have two goalies. So I think there's a much better chance that Mikko Koskinen is not back than Mike Smith is back. I think Mikko at his age, I think he's 33 coming up. His goal average dropped dramatically this year. He only played 6 games from the last couple of months. I think they rode Mike Smith and they played every minute in the playoffs. I think they're looking at Koskinen and saying, you know what, as good as you have been in a platoon system, if we can find a younger goalie at 27 years old and somehow trade you to another team that's not too bad and eat some of the contract, say, theoretically, I mean, I don't know if this will happen, but theoretically he makes $4.5 million next year for one more year, and the Oilers say, we'll eat $1.5 million of that to trade you. So you trade him to another team that's only going to have to pick up $3 million of that contract. And you try to trade him to, say, Columbus for Korpisalo, who's 27, making $2.7 million. So the dollars add up to around the same. But you also have to throw in a prospect and maybe some sort of draft pick to get a younger goalie who can play with Mike. And Columbus would have Koskinen for 1 year only. And then if they had other goalies they wanted to look at, fine. And plus he's a Finnish goalie, and they got a Finnish general manager, so that might work. I would say the odds of Koskinen being back as the goalie for the Oilers next year are a lot less than Mike Smith coming in at a raise, getting a raise as the starting goalie. I think somehow the Oilers will find a way to say to Mikko, you know what? I don't think you played. I think what happened to Mikko this year is he seemed to lose his confidence. I think he had to play all the games early, and then he couldn't play all the games. The team didn't play great. He played, the first month of the season, every game but one when Stuart Skinner played, and then his game started to drop off. And then when Smith came in, he played a ton of games. And then when Mikko did play, there were some games where he'd give up a goal early, usually, and he'd lose his confidence and didn't play so well. And I think it's a question with him. They perceive him as a platoon goalie, which is fine, but if you can get a platoon goalie younger than a 33-year-old with a 39-year-old, I think the Oilers are going to try that. I think Mikko will be available in the expansion draft.
Last year in the bubble playoffs in the qualifying round, The Oilers started Smith for Game 1 against Chicago, and then they turned in Game 2 to Koskinen, and he started the rest of the way. So we have to consider that. He had a good year, Koskinen, in 2019-20. And I guess for any athletes, sometimes you're on, and sometimes you're not quite as on. So given that he, had that good season last year, don't you think he deserves a chance to bounce back?
Maybe, but I don't know. I think trying to figure out goaltending is voodoo, to be honest. I think there's lots of goalies do play well one year and don't play so well the next year. And in Mike Smith's case, he played well last year, but he played even better this year, and he got older. So I don't really know. I think the perception is with the Oilers that if you can somehow trade a goalie and pick up another goalie rather than go out and try to bid against everybody else in free agency for a goalie, I think it's better, to make a trade, somehow trade Koskinen to a team and say you're a platoon guy, but only at a certain price. I think they would rather do that. I think Koskinen's still got game. I think he's an NHL goalie. There are lots of people out there who think he's, worse than he is. I don't think he is, but he's a platoon goalie. He's a goalie who can play 30 games in a year, maybe 35, maybe, but I don't know. He's not a starter. Mike Smith has the mentality is that he's a starter, and until proven otherwise, he's a starter. And in Koskinen's case, even when Cam Talbot was here, there was a split. And they traded Cam and then had to play Mikko too many games towards the end of the year, and he didn't play very well. He plays better in a platoon system. But as long as Mike Smith's here and he's perceived as a starter, you can get a cheaper goalie to play with Mike Smith than one making $4.5 million. If the other guy, if one guy plays 50 and the other guy plays 30, and the guy playing 30 is making $4.5 million, that's not good economics.
Ken Holland did bring up the idea of buyout during his media availability. And the first person you might think of would be James Neal, who has 2 years left on his contract, and he commands a fairly decent salary. But do you think perhaps Koskinen could be a candidate to be bought out?
I would say no. I would say that Kyle Turris is a better alternative to be bought out. One more year at a $2 million salary, considering he didn't play a minute in the playoffs. And he only played 25, 27 games this year. I think that's a better possibility, even though the savings is not great, and you'd be saving a lot less. But even if your savings were $800,000 on his contract, maybe you spend that $800 on some other player you want to bring back, Devon Shore or somebody. You throw that $800 towards him to pay his contract. So I would say no on Koskinen as a buyout. I think they would rather try and trade him if they don't want him back. They already have Sekera on a buyout from, he's playing in Dallas now at $1.5 million for the next 2 years. So that's one buyout. If they did buy out James Neal, they're saving, I think it's $1.9 million a year for the next 4 years. So 1.9 and 1.5, that's $3.4 million on players that aren't on your team. Koskinen's case, 2/3 of $4.5 million is, I don't know, is that $3 million? I don't know what it is, but you're still paying that over 2 years. That's another $1.5 million on a player. It's an awful lot of players' money you're paying to players that are not on your team. Plus, we forget the $750,000 of Milan Lucic's contract the Oilers are paying, and he's in Calgary. A lot of dead money, and I don't know how many buyouts you can have.